The salt hit my nose before the sea came into view. The ferry engine wheezed as Elliot Brooks guided us through the morning fog toward Ravenwater Isle Resort. My duffel bag sat between my boots, everything I owned for the next 4 months packed tight inside. "First time out here?" Elliot asked, squinting through the mist. "Yeah, looking forward to it." He gave a sound halfway between a grunt and a laugh. "Ravenwater's different. Once the ferry leaves, you're cut off. No cell bars, no quick trips to town. Ferry runs twice a week if the weather's kind." The fog thinned, revealing jagged pines rising from black rock. A wooden pier appeared like a ghost's arm stretching into the grey water. Beyond it, cabins and a main lodge huddled against the forest. "That's it," Elliot said, throttling back. "Ravenwater Resort. Some folks love it here. Others last 2 weeks before they're begging for the mainland. Which one you think you'll be?" I smiled faintly. "Guess we'll find out." He finally looked at me, his leathery face unreadable. "The island gets to people in different ways." The ferry bumped against the dock. Elliot tied off the rope and nodded toward the pier. "Go on. Miss Lang will be waiting at the lodge." I stepped onto the dock. The wood creaked beneath me, waves slapping the pylons. When I turned, the ferry was already easing back into the fog, and the silence that followed was heavy, as if the island had swallowed the sound. A gravel path cut through towering pines leading to the main lodge, a weathered structure with green shutters and smoke curling from its chimney. Before I reached the steps, the front door swung open. A woman in her 40s stepped out, blonde hair in a neat twist, expression crisp and efficient. "You must be Noah Reed," she said, extending a hand. "Marianne Lang, resort manager. Welcome to Ravenwater." Her grip was firm. "Thank you, ma'am. How was the crossing?" "Elliot didn't scare you off with his ghost stories, did he? He mentioned the island can be isolating." Marianne smiled. "He says that to every newcomer. Thinks anyone under 50 will lose their mind without Wi-Fi." She gestured for me to follow her inside. The lodge smelled of pine polish and coffee. Through the windows I saw a dining room dressed with white cloths and a stone fireplace framed by leather chairs. "Most of our guests are from Seattle and Portland," she said. "Couples seeking peace. Families who want to disconnect. Nothing too demanding." A young woman looked up from wiping tables, dark hair tied back, quick smile. "That's Lena Park, kitchen staff," Marianne said. "You'll meet the others soon." She led me down a hallway lined with framed photos of fog-shrouded beaches and dark woods pressing against the glass. "The resort covers the south end of the island," Marianne explained. "The north side's forest, old cabins nobody uses anymore. Locals say it's haunted." She said it lightly, but the way her eyes flicked toward the window made me wonder if she believed it. 2 men entered from a side door, both in work clothes with mugs in hand. One tall with sandy hair and easy confidence, the other shorter, cheerful, his smile instant. "Perfect timing," Marianne said. "Noah, this is Grayson Cole and Evan Mora. Grayson's your roommate. Evan handles housekeeping." Grayson shook my hand. "Good to have another set of hands. You ready to get dirty?" "That's what I'm here for." Evan grinned. "Welcome to paradise. Hope you like the smell of pine. That's all you'll smell for months." "Beats exhaust fumes," I said. Marianne led us to the staff cabins tucked deeper in the trees. 6 guest cabins dotted the path, porches facing the sea. At the far end sat a larger cabin with 2 entrances. "This one's yours," she said, unlocking the door. "You and Grayson share it. Evan and Lena stay next door." Inside was simple. 2 bedrooms, a small living space, a kitchenette that hummed faintly. Grayson pointed to the left. "That one's mine. You can take the other." The right room was bare, but neat. Single bed, dresser, window facing the woods. I dropped my bag. "Perfect." Marianne checked her phone. "Breakfast at 7, lunch at noon, dinner at 6. You'll handle maintenance and dock repairs. Grayson will show you where the tools are. And, Noah, don't wander too far into the forest. Paths fade fast out here." I nodded. She smiled, polite and distant, then headed back toward the lodge. Grayson clapped my shoulder. "You'll like it here. Quiet, simple work. Just stay busy and the days go fast." The way he said it sounded practiced, like a reminder more for himself than for me. As dusk fell and the fog rolled in again, I realized Elliot Brooks had been right. The island already felt different. Like the world beyond the shoreline had stopped existing. By the end of my first week, Ravenwater felt like a place caught between worlds. The mainland was just a shadow on the horizon, visible only when the fog lifted, but it already seemed unreal, like a memory that didn't belong to me anymore. Days passed quietly. I woke at sunrise to the sound of gulls and wind moving through the trees, ate breakfast in the lodge with the rest of the staff, and spent my hours trimming hedges, repairing fences, or carrying luggage for guests who wanted nothing more than to be left alone. The work was steady and simple. Grayson showed me where every tool was kept in the shed behind the staff cabins, a neat row of mowers, trimmers, and spare parts. He worked with the calm rhythm of someone who knew the island's routines by heart. "Don't rush," he told me. "Ravenwater's not the kind of place that likes hurry." He was right. Nothing here moved fast. The air was heavy with salt, and every sound seemed to echo longer than it should, like the island didn't want to let go of it. At night, the quiet became a living thing. The guests would finish dinner by 6 and retreat to their cabins. By 7, the entire resort went still. The forest surrounded everything, thick and dark, and even the sea sounded muffled beneath the fog. Grayson said, "You got used to it after a while, but some nights the silence felt too perfect, as if the island was waiting for something." I started noticing small things that didn't fit. The path lights flickered for no reason, always near the forest edge. Tools moved from one side of the shed to another without anyone admitting they'd used them. Once, while sweeping the lodge deck before dawn, I thought I heard someone walking behind me. The footsteps stopped the second I turned. When I told Grayson, he laughed it off. Probably a raccoon. They love sneaking around before sunrise. Marianne ran the resort with practiced precision. She was polite but distant, always writing in her notebook, always moving from one task to the next. She treated the guests like fragile objects, smiling when they smiled, disappearing when they didn't. I rarely saw her after dinner. She'd vanish into her office with a pot of coffee and reappear the next morning looking exactly the same. Pressed and perfect. Lena, on the other hand, made the place feel alive. She always found something to laugh about. Even when the kitchen freezer broke down, or when the generator flickered in the middle of dinner service. "The island tests people," she said one afternoon, while stacking dishes. "Some folks pass, some don't." I asked her what she meant, but she only smiled and said, "You'll see." Evan spent most of his time cleaning cabins and fixing plumbing that didn't want to work in the damp air. He was easy to talk to, always ready with a story about guests who packed entire suitcases of electronics only to realize there was no signal. The four of us, Grayson, Evan, Lena, and Mate, together most evenings. The food was simple, mostly fish and vegetables from the small garden behind the lodge, but the company made it feel warm still. I couldn't shake the sense that the island was watching. Every trail I took ended at the same place, the northern line, where the trimmed lawns of the resort met the dense, untouched forest. The air there always felt colder, heavier. Grayson warned me not to go past the boundary, saying the trails weren't maintained and it was easy to get lost. But I caught him looking toward the woods more often than he realized, like he was listening for something. One morning, a guest asked me where the sound of bells came from at night. I told her there weren't any bells on the island. She looked embarrassed and dropped the question. But later that evening, as I walked back to the cabin, I thought I heard them, 2 soft chimes somewhere deep within the forest, faint and irregular, like wind moving through hollow glass. When I mentioned it to Grayson, he shook his head. "The wind plays tricks here. Don't start chasing noises. That's how people lose their bearings." By the second week, the island's rhythm had settled into me completely. I stopped checking my phone, stopped counting days. Each morning felt like the one before, and each night the same dark calm. But every time I passed that line of trees at the north edge of the property, I felt eyes on me. I told myself it was imagination, that isolation was getting under my skin the way Elliot Brooks had warned. Yet when I looked back toward the forest, I sometimes thought I saw movement, something too steady to be wind, too quiet to be human. I didn't know it then, but that was the last full week the island would feel normal. The morning air was cool and damp when I started trimming the hedges near the forest edge. The line of shrubs marked the boundary between the resort's tidy paths and the thick wild of the northern woods. It was quiet, except for the hum of the trimmer and the steady beat of my own breath. The fog had lifted, leaving behind the faint scent of salt and pine. I worked for almost an hour before I noticed it. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, a flicker of color between the trees. Then I saw her, a woman standing deep in the forest, maybe 50 yards away, perfectly still between two pines. She wore a red dress that burned against the greens and browns around her, the kind of red that didn't belong in nature. It was elegant, smooth fabric that looked too clean for the woods, as if she had stepped out of a different world entirely. I turned off the trimmer. The sudden silence was heavy. "Hello," I called out. My voice carried through the stillness, but she didn't answer. She didn't move. She stood with her arms at her sides, head tilted slightly, watching me. The air felt colder near the trees. I took a few steps closer, stopping at the edge of the trimmed path. "Are you okay?" Still nothing. No reaction, no sound, not even a breath I could hear. The longer I watched her, the stranger it felt. Her stillness wasn't normal. It wasn't the kind of calm you see in a person resting. It was absolute. Not a muscle twitched, not a strand of hair moved, even though the wind was blowing through the branches. I couldn't make out her face clearly, but I could feel her eyes on me, fixed and unblinking. A chill ran through my arms. I wanted to look away, but something about her made it hard to move. It was as if she was waiting for me to do something specific and wrong. My throat felt dry. "You're not supposed to be out here," I said. "These trails are closed." She didn't answer. The forest behind her seemed darker now, deeper, like the trees were closing ranks around her. I stood there for several long seconds before I finally picked up the trimmer again. The sound broke the spell. The motor roared to life, filling the air with vibration. I cut another section of hedge, trying to focus on the work, pretending she wasn't there. When I looked up again 10 minutes later, she was gone. I told myself she must have walked off while I wasn't watching. There were old trails through those woods, overgrown but still there. Maybe she was a guest who'd wandered too far. That explanation held together until I remembered how still she'd been. No one stands motionless for that long. No one disappears that silently. That evening, I couldn't shake the image of the red dress glowing against the dark trees. Grayson was cooking dinner in the cabin when I came in. "You want pasta?" he asked, opening a jar of sauce. I nodded and sat at the table. For a while, I just watched him move around the small kitchen, steady and calm, like nothing could touch him. When he finally sat down, I said it. "I saw someone in the woods today." He looked up, fork halfway to his mouth. "Probably a guest." "She was wearing a red dress," I said. "Bright red, formal, not the kind of thing anyone would wear hiking." He shrugged. "Rich people wear weird stuff sometimes. Maybe she was taking pictures or something." "She wasn't moving," I said quietly. "She stood there for 20 minutes without shifting at all." I called out, and she didn't even blink. Grayson laughed lightly. "Come on, 20 minutes. You were working, man. Time plays tricks when you're focused." I checked my watch. She was there when I started, still there when I looked again. Then she vanished. He twirled the pasta on his fork. "She probably just walked off when you weren't looking. The forest is thick. Sound carries weird out here. You'd never hear her leave." I wanted to argue, but his calmness made me feel stupid. Maybe he was right. Maybe it was just my mind reacting to the isolation. I let the conversation die there, but I couldn't stop replaying it in my head. That night, I lay awake, listening to the waves crash faintly in the distance. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her standing between those trees, arms at her sides, face too still, red dress glowing through the dark. I told myself she was real, that I hadn't imagined her. But as the hours passed, the certainty started to slip away. When I finally fell asleep, I dreamed of the forest. The sound of the trimmer was gone, replaced by breathing that wasn't mine. When I turned, I saw her again, closer this time, face pale and expressionless. The red dress looked wet, clinging to her skin. She raised her hand slowly, pointing toward me. I woke up with my heart racing and the sound of the wind pressing against the cabin walls. By morning, the dream was fading. But one thought stayed clear in my head. The woman hadn't come from the forest. The forest had sent her. The next morning the sky was washed in a dull silver light that made the island look endless. I spent the early hours checking the docks with Grayson, tightening bolts and replacing warped planks from the winter storms. He hummed quietly while he worked, calm as always, and the ordinary sound of tools on wood should have been comforting. But it only made the silence of the forest seem louder. I kept glancing toward the tree line. It stood motionless beyond the open lawn, a dark wall that swallowed every bit of sunlight before it could reach the ground. I wanted to tell Grayson I felt like someone was watching us again, but I stopped myself. After how he'd brushed off my story about the woman in red, I knew what he'd say. When we took a break, I finally spoke. "You ever get the feeling this place isn't normal?" I asked. He wiped his hands with a rag and smiled. Define normal. We're on a rock in the middle of nowhere. The wind howls half the time, and the generator dies twice a month. That's not exactly a city block. I tried to laugh, but it came out wrong. I mean, have you ever seen anything strange in the woods? His expression didn't change, but I saw the pause in his eyes. Like what? Like someone who shouldn't be there. He tossed the rag onto the dock. You're still thinking about that woman, aren't you? I saw her. She was real. He crouched to tighten another bolt. I'm sure you did. Probably some photographer or lost hiker from another part of the island. She didn't move. She didn't even blink. Grayson stood and looked at me directly. Noah, we've been here for weeks. The isolation gets inside your head. You start seeing things. You think you hear voices, or footsteps, or someone watching from the trees. I went through it my first season too. You'll get used to it. The way he said it sounded rehearsed, like he'd said those exact words to someone else before. He went back to work without another word. But the conversation stayed in my chest like a splinter. That afternoon we joined Lena and Evan in the dining hall for lunch. The guests had gone hiking, and the place was quiet, except for the sound of rain tapping the roof. Lena poured coffee and asked about the repairs. Grayson did the talking, smiling easily as he described how smoothly everything was running. He didn't mention the argument or my questions. You two seem to be getting along, Lena said. It's good to see. Last year's maintenance pair barely spoke to each other by the end of the season. Grayson said, we're a good team. I forced a smile and nodded, pretending to agree. But while he ate and joked with the others, I kept watching his face, searching for any sign that he was hiding something. The calmness he wore like armor never cracked. When the rain stopped, I went outside to clear branches from the path behind the staff cabins. The air smelled sharp and clean after the storm. I worked for almost an hour before realizing I had wandered close to the forest again. The trimmed grass faded to ferns and roots, and ahead of me the same two pines I remembered from before stood like sentries. Something about them drew my attention, and before I knew it, I was standing at the edge again, staring into the trees. There was nothing there this time. No flash of red, no shape between the trunks, only the stillness. I told myself that was a good thing, that it meant I was fine. But even as I turned to walk back toward the cabins, I could feel something behind me. Not movement, not sound, just awareness, quiet and patient. That night, Grayson and I ate dinner in the cabin. He talked about the next day's work schedule, but I barely heard him. I kept thinking about the way the forest had felt alive earlier, as if it had been holding its breath. When I didn't answer one of his questions, he looked up. You're still thinking about her? I can't stop, I said. I know what I saw. He sighed and leaned back in his chair. Look, the mind does weird things when it's cut off. You start connecting shadows and sounds until they turn into faces. Happens to everyone out here eventually. She was wearing a red dress. You can't mistake that. Then next time you see her, take a picture. His tone wasn't cruel, but the words landed hard. Later that night, I sat by the window while he read in bed. The fog had rolled in again, thick enough to blur the lights from the guest cabins into soft yellow orbs. The forest beyond them was a wall of black. I stayed there for hours, waiting for movement, waiting for proof that I wasn't imagining everything. But the trees stayed still, and the only sound was the faint whistle of the wind through the chimney. When I finally went to bed, I told myself I'd stop thinking about her, but deep down, I knew she wasn't gone. She was waiting for me to look at the trees again. Thursday morning came bright and calm, the first clear day in almost a week. Grayson and I had been assigned to reinforce the dock after Marianne complained that a few boards were coming loose. The sea was quiet, the kind of smooth surface that looks like it's holding its breath. We carried our tools down the wooden path, and for a while, everything felt normal again. Grayson worked near the base of the dock, tightening bolts and braces, while I replaced 2 planks at the far end. The scent of salt water and sun-warmed wood filled the air. Seagulls drifted overhead, their calls sharp against the silence. For once, the island didn't feel threatening. It felt empty, peaceful. Then I straightened up to stretch my back and looked toward the forest. She was there, the same woman, the same red dress. She stood at the edge of the trees, no more than 60 yards away, lit by the pale sunlight that barely reached through the pines. The red fabric burned against the shadows behind her. She was perfectly still, her arms at her sides, her face turned directly toward me. My hammer slipped from my hand and hit the dock with a heavy clang. Careful, Grayson said without looking up. I couldn't speak. My voice caught in my throat. I turned toward him. Grayson, look toward the tree line. Do you see her? He looked up. Following my gaze, his eyes scanned the forest for a few seconds before he shrugged and went back to his wrench. See who? The woman in the red dress. She's right there. He looked again, longer this time. I don't see anyone. Noah. She's standing right between those two pines. Long dark hair. You don't see her. He stood beside me, squinting toward the forest. Just trees. The chill in my stomach spread to my chest. Either he was lying, or something was horribly wrong. The woman's red dress rippled faintly, though the trees around her were motionless. Her gaze never moved. I'm going over there, I said. What? Why? I didn't answer. I stepped off the dock and into the damp sand, my boots sinking with every stride. The closer I got, the colder the air became. The forest ahead looked darker than it had any right to be at midday. I could still see her, the red glowing faintly like a coal in the shadows. My breath came shorter as I reached the first line of trees. Behind me, Grayson shouted something, but the words faded under the sound of the waves. I kept walking. The ground changed beneath my feet, turning from sand to moss and roots. The woman was maybe 20 yards ahead now. Her face was pale, almost white in the filtered light, her expression blank. Her lips parted slightly, but no sound came out. Then she moved just a single step forward, and something inside me broke. I turned and ran, crashing through branches and roots until I stumbled back into the open. Gasping, Grayson caught my arm before I fell. What the hell were you doing? He snapped. She moved. I swear to God, she moved. He looked past me again, toward the trees. There's nobody there. Noah, you ran into the woods for nothing. I turned to look. The forest edge was empty. The space between the two pines was just shadows and wind. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. She was there. Grayson's face softened slightly. You need to take a break. This place gets to people. Go wash up. Get some air. I'll finish here. I didn't argue. My hands were shaking too badly to hold a hammer anyway. I walked back toward the cabins, trying not to look at the trees again. But the red color was still burned into my mind, bright and impossible. She had moved. That wasn't my imagination. And for the first time, I realized something terrible. She wanted me to follow her. By Friday afternoon, the sky had cleared, and the sea was calm enough to reflect the sun like glass. Grayson was in good spirits, more talkative than usual. He had convinced Marianne to let us take the motorboat out after lunch. Evan and Lena joined us, glad for a break from the endless routine. The air smelled like salt and diesel as Grayson tested the engine, humming while checking the radio and fuel gauge. For the first time in days, I felt a thin thread of ease unwind in my chest. Everyone know how to swim? He asked, his voice cheerful. We nodded. Lena laughed, brushing her hair back. Just don't hit any rocks. We'll cruise around the island, Grayson said, starting the motor. See what this place looks like from the outside for once. The boat pulled away from the dock smoothly, cutting through the blue water. The resort grew smaller behind us, its cabins swallowed by pines. The island looked different from here, sharper, almost alive. Cliffs rose from the water like teeth, and the sound of the waves against the stone echoed across the bay. For the first hour, everything felt normal. Evan cracked jokes, Lena pointed out seabirds, and Grayson kept the boat steady, guiding us along the southern coast. The sunlight shimmered on the water, warm against my skin. For a while, I almost believed that the woman in red had been a dream. When we rounded the northern point, the atmosphere changed. The cliffs gave way to a narrow strip of rocky beach, where the forest leaned close to the water. The light dimmed slightly, though the sun hadn't gone anywhere. The trees seemed denser here, darker. I moved to the bow to get a better look. That's when I saw her. She stood at the water's edge, exactly where the waves met the stones. The red dress was the same bright, clean, out of place. Her dark hair hung still, untouched by the wind that ruffled the surface of the bay. Even from the distance, I could feel her eyes on me. I froze. Grayson stopped the boat. He cut the throttle, and the motor fell silent, except for its idle hum. The others followed my gaze. Lena squinted. What are you looking at? The woman, I said. The one in the red dress. She's right there. Grayson stared toward the shore. I don't see anything. She's standing by the trees, I insisted. You don't see her? Evan shook his head. There's no one there. Noah. I turned back, my pulse racing. She was still there, her reflection faintly rippling on the water's surface. Then slowly she raised her hand and pointed directly at me. Grayson's voice cut through the quiet. "What's wrong with you?" "She's pointing at me," I said, backing away from the edge. "You really don't see her?" He didn't answer. The color had drained from his face, but his eyes were fixed on the shore now. Then, without warning, he pushed the throttle forward. The boat surged toward the beach. "Grayson!" Lena shouted. "What are you doing?" "She's real," he said, his voice flat, distant. "She wants to talk." "Stop the boat." I grabbed his arm, but he shook me off. The engine roared, the waves splashing high against the bow. The red figure on the shore didn't move. She waited. We hit the shallows with a jolt that nearly threw me off balance. Grayson jumped out before I could stop him, wading through the knee-deep water toward her. The rest of us shouted after him, but he didn't turn. The woman stood perfectly still as he reached her. Then she leaned forward, whispering something I couldn't hear. For a moment, Grayson just stood there. Then he nodded. The wind shifted, bringing the smell of seaweed and something metallic. Grayson turned back toward us, his face expressionless. "It's fine," he said, though his voice sounded wrong, like someone else was using his mouth. "Let's head back." He climbed into the boat without another word. None of us spoke on the return trip. The only sound was the low thrum of the motor and the water breaking against the hull. By the time we reached the dock, the sun was setting. The sky was red, exactly the same shade as her dress. Something in Grayson changed after that trip. It wasn't sudden, not the kind of thing you could point to in a single moment, but a slow drift into something unfamiliar. He stopped joking, stopped joining us for meals in the lodge. He spent more time alone, staring out toward the sea, as if waiting for something to appear on the horizon. When I asked if he was all right, he'd smile just enough to seem human and say he was fine. That the island had a way of getting into your head, if you let it. But his eyes didn't match his voice. 2 mornings after the boat ride, I woke before dawn and heard movement outside the cabin. When I looked through the window, I saw Grayson standing by the dock in his work clothes, motionless, staring into the dark water. The fog hung low, and the tide lapped at the pylons. He stood there for almost 10 minutes without moving. When I stepped outside and called to him, he didn't react right away. Then he turned, face blank, and said he'd just been checking the tide levels. His tone was flat, mechanical, like the words weren't his. That day, he insisted we skip breakfast and get straight to work. "Less distraction," he said. "We should keep to ourselves more." It sounded strange coming from him. He'd been the one organizing card nights and group dinners when I first arrived, but now he barely spoke to Lena or Evan. When she came by that evening to invite us to watch a movie in the lounge, he told her we were too tired and shut the door before I could say a word. By midweek, the isolation had turned into something sharper. Grayson started shadowing me during every task. Before, we'd split up. He'd handled the dock repairs while I worked near the cabin's butt. Now he followed me everywhere. Even simple things like replacing light bulbs or trimming hedges had to be done side by side. When I asked him why, he said, "It's safer this way. We should stay close." I told him nothing had ever gone wrong before. He just looked at me and said, "It will." The longer it went on, the more I felt like he was watching me, not the work. Sometimes I'd turn around and catch him staring, eyes slightly unfocused, expression unreadable. Once, I pretended to head to the shed for new supplies and doubled back quietly. He was standing behind our cabin, talking in a low voice to no one. The air around him was still, but he spoke as if someone was right beside him. I could only make out a few words. "She knows, and not yet." When he noticed me, he flinched like I'd caught him doing something forbidden. "Just thinking out loud," he said. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed listening to the creak of the walls as the wind pressed against them. Then I heard it again, his footsteps on the floorboards, soft and deliberate. I thought he was heading to the bathroom, but the steps went past it and out the door. I got up quietly and looked through the window. He was walking toward the dock again, barefoot this time, clothes soaked from the rain. The water shimmered with faint light from the moon breaking through clouds. He stopped at the very edge, staring into the black surface. I whispered his name, but he didn't move. Then, as I watched, I saw something in the reflection beside him, a second figure, faint and red. It wasn't a trick of the light. The color was too strong, too deliberate. I stepped back from the window, heart pounding. When I looked again, the red shimmer was gone, and Grayson was turning toward the cabin. I dove into bed and pretended to be asleep when he came in. The door closed softly, and I heard the sound of dripping water hitting the floor. The next morning, his clothes were dry, folded neatly at the foot of his bed. When I asked if he'd gone out last night, he looked confused. "I was asleep," he said. "You must have dreamed it, but I knew I hadn't. And when I went down to the dock later that day, I saw footprints in the damp wood, bare feet, smaller than his. The prints stopped at the edge, facing the water, as if whoever made them had stepped forward and disappeared. That night, when I tried to sleep, I heard whispering through the wall. Not Grayson's voice this time. A woman's, calm, rhythmic, and close enough that it felt like she was leaning over me, speaking through the air itself. I covered my ears, but the words still found their way in. "She's waiting for you too." By the end of that week, the island no longer felt alive, it felt conscious. The air carried a pressure that hadn't been there before, like the atmosphere itself was watching. The forest didn't whisper anymore, it listened. And Grayson had become a stranger living beside me, wearing his own face like a mask. He barely slept. Every morning, I woke to find him sitting by the window, staring out toward the water. When I spoke to him, he acted normal, asked if I wanted coffee or if I'd checked the generator. But the words came with no warmth, no rhythm. He moved slower, spoke quieter, as if something was controlling the distance between every breath. On Sunday, Marianne asked us to inspect the northern fence line. It was deep in the wooded section that bordered the abandoned cabins she always told us to avoid. I expected Grayson to refuse. He'd spent the last few days insisting we stay near the dock spot instead. He agreed too quickly. "We'll handle it," he said. Before I could speak, we packed the tools and followed the overgrown trail. The deeper we went, the quieter the island became. Even the gulls disappeared. The sunlight faded beneath the thick canopy, and a strange smell hung in the air, sweet, wet, and metallic. After an hour of walking, we reached the fence. The wire sagged in places, and moss crawled up the posts. I started tightening the bolts while Grayson inspected the far end. When I looked up again, he was gone. "Grayson." My voice echoed through the trees. No answer. I set the wrench down and followed the path he'd taken. The forest was too still. The only sound was my heartbeat and the crunch of damp earth beneath my boots. When I reached the clearing, he was standing there perfectly still, facing away from me, and she was with him. The woman in red. Her dress moved faintly in the wind, though the trees around her were still. She stood beside him, one hand resting lightly on his shoulder, his head tilted toward her as if listening. My breath caught in my throat. "Grayson," I said. He turned. His eyes were different, too dark, too flat. "You shouldn't have followed," he said. "She's not real," I said, my voice shaking. "Whatever this is, it's in your head." He smiled faintly. "You keep saying that, but you're the one who saw her first." The woman stepped forward, her feet barely disturbing the leaves. Her face was clearer now. Pale skin, lips the color of dried blood, and eyes that looked like they belonged to something older than the sea itself. She tilted her head, studying me with quiet amusement. "Don't come closer," I warned. Grayson didn't move. "She says you've been chosen," he said. "She told me you brought her here." My throat went dry. "You're not making sense." "She's been waiting for you to listen," he said softly. "If you just let her in, it'll stop hurting." I took a step back. "We need to leave. Right now." The woman smiled. The sound that came from her mouth wasn't laughter, was a whisper, layered and deep, like 1,000 voices all speaking at once. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over a root. Grayson took a step toward me. "You can't fight her. She's not real," I said again, louder this time, trying to convince myself. "You're sick, Grayson." He reached out, his hand trembling. I wasn't until she touched me. Then she turned her gaze directly on me. My chest tightened like I'd been plunged into freezing water. My body wanted to run, but I couldn't move. The sound around me warped, the air thickened, and for a split second I saw something impossible, faces inside her shadow. Hundreds of them, mouths open in silent screams. I gasped and fell to my knees. When I looked up again, she was gone. Grayson stood alone, staring down at the spot where she'd been. "What did you see?" he asked, his voice hollow. "Nothing," I said, but the lie felt heavy on my tongue. He turned toward the path. "Let's go back." Neither of us spoke the whole walk back to the cabins. When we reached the clearing near the dock, the fog had returned, thick and suffocating. Grayson disappeared into the cabin without another word. I stood outside for a long time, staring into the water. My reflection wavered, fractured by the ripples. For a moment, I thought I saw her standing behind me in the reflection reed, and still, when I turned around, there was only fog. That night, I locked my door for the first time. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the ocean moving beneath the island like a heartbeat. The walls of the cabin creaked, and the wind pressed against the windows, whispering in tones that almost formed words. Somewhere near dawn, I realized I couldn't stay another day. The island wasn't just isolated, it was alive, and whatever lived within it had found its way into Grayson. If I didn't leave, it would find its way into me to Dot. When morning came, Grayson was gone. His bed was made perfectly, sheets tight, tools lined up neatly on his desk. I found his jacket draped over the chair and his boots by the door. Outside, the fog was so thick I could barely see the tree line. The air smelled of salt and metal. Dot. I walked to the dock. The motorboat we'd used days ago sat tied to the post, rocking gently. The fuel tank was half full. I didn't waste time. I grabbed the keys from the shed and loaded a few supplies: water, a flashlight, some food. The engine coughed before catching, the low hum cutting through the silence like a scream. The noise must have drawn him. From the fog, Grayson appeared on the path, barefoot, eyes sunken and red-rimmed. He didn't run, just walked slowly toward me, voice low and even. "Where are you going, Noah?" "I'm getting help," I said, forcing the words out. "There's nowhere to go," he said. "She won't let you leave. She's not real," I shouted. But even as I said it, I could feel her presence pressing closer. Like the air itself was shrinking. Grayson stepped onto the dock. His skin looked pale, almost translucent, and there was something strange about the way he moved, too smooth, too precise. "She showed me what happens if you run," he said. "The island doesn't like to be abandoned." I grabbed the rope and started untying it. "Get back, Grayson." He shook his head. "She's already here." Then I saw her, standing at the edge of the dock, behind him. The red dress looked darker in the fog, the color of dried blood. Her eyes caught the faint morning light, black and endless. She didn't move, didn't speak. The fog curled around her like smoke. Grayson turned and looked at her. "He doesn't understand," he said softly. Her head tilted. The corners of her mouth curved upward. I jumped into the boat, yanked the last knot free, and gunned the engine. The motor roared, propelling me forward. The dock slipped away beneath the white wall of fog. I looked back once. Grayson was standing beside her, hand outstretched, calm and still. She raised her hand too, mirroring his gesture. Then both of them disappeared into the mist. The water stretched endlessly ahead. I couldn't see the horizon. For a moment, I thought I was moving in circles, the same sound of waves, the same emptiness. My heart pounded as I pushed the throttle harder. Then, out of nowhere, the radio crackled. Static filled the air, followed by a faint voice. "This is the Coast Guard. Identify yourself." I grabbed the receiver. "This is Noah Reed. I'm at Ravenwater Isle. I need help. People are missing. There's something." The voice cut off, swallowed by static. The engine sputtered. My pulse froze. The boat lurched once, then the motor died completely. The silence was absolute. The fog shifted around me, and for a moment, I thought I heard whispering from the water. I leaned over the edge. The surface was too dark, too still, like a mirror of the sky. Then a shape moved beneath a tread, slow and graceful. I stumbled back, fumbling for the ignition. The engine refused to start. My breath came fast. The red shape rose closer to the surface, forming the outline of a woman. Her face broke through the water, eyes open, smiling. I screamed and kicked the throttle again. The engine coughed once, twice, then roared to life. I slammed it forward. The boat surged ahead, slicing through the fog. I didn't look back again when I finally saw the coastline. I didn't believe it at first. The mainland looked unreal, flat against the sky. I drove straight for it, heart hammering so hard I could barely breathe. When the hull scraped against sand, I jumped out and ran until my legs gave out. Behind me, the sea was calm again. No fog, no sound, just empty blue. The Coast Guard found me hours later, half conscious on the beach, sunburned and shaking. I told them what happened. They sent a crew to the island. When they came back, they said there was no one there. The resort was abandoned. The cabin's empty. The boat's gone. They didn't believe me when I said I saw her. They didn't believe me when I said Grayson was still there. But I know what I saw. Sometimes, when the weather turns cold and the wind carries that faint scent of salt, I swear I hear a voice under the waves. Soft, patient, and familiar. She's still waiting. They kept me at the hospital for 2 nights. The Coast Guard doctor said I was dehydrated, disoriented, and probably suffering from exhaustion. I didn't argue. Every time I tried to explain what happened on Ravenwater, the words came out wrong. I'd start describing the woman in red, how she whispered through fog, how she pulled people apart from the inside, and I could see the looks in their eyes change. They stopped listening and started writing. The police interviewed me the next morning. A detective from the mainland asked the same questions over and over. How many people were on the island? When was the last time I saw them? Was there any sign of violence? I told them everything about Grayson, Marianne, Lena, Evan, but when their search teams went back, they found nothing. Not a single footprint, not a scrap of food, not even a broken chair. It was as if the island had swallowed them whole. The official report said the resort had been closed for months. No guests, no active staff contracts, no supply deliveries since spring. They showed me a photo of the Pierrot, half collapsed, covered in moss. My mind couldn't reconcile it. I had stood there a week ago. I'd touched that same wood. I had seen the lights on in the lodge, the smoke rising from the chimney. When I told the detective that, he closed his notebook slowly. You've been through a trauma, he said. Sometimes isolation plays tricks on people. But they weren't tricks. I still wake in the middle of the night with salt on my lips and the sound of waves hitting pylons. After I was released, I tried to move inland, far from the coast. I rented a small apartment in Portland, took a maintenance job at a storage facility, and told myself I'd start over. But the ocean has a way of calling things back. Every time I pass a harbor, I feel her eyes on me again. One evening, a month later, I received a package with no return address. Inside was a single photograph, grainy. It showed the resort as I remembered it. The cabins clean, the dock intact, smoke rising from the lodge. But in the corner of the frame, near the trees, stood a woman in a red dress. I tore the photo apart and threw it away. The next morning, it was back on my kitchen table, perfectly whole. Since then, I've stopped sleeping near windows. The sound of water unnerves me. I keep the radio on at night, even when the static grows louder than the station beneath it. Sometimes, through the crackle, I hear her voice, soft and distant, like it's traveling through miles of fog. She says my name the way the sea says the shore again and again. Until something breaks, they'll tell you Ravenwater Isle doesn't exist anymore. They'll say the maps are wrong, the coordinates outdated, that erosion took it long ago. But they're lying. The island is still there, waiting under the mist, patient and eternal. And sometimes, when the tide pulls low and the fog rolls in, the light catches on the water just right hand. You can see her standing on the shore, dress red as blood, smiling like she never left.